And we are now on the air, and let's get our clickety clacks and so forth and so on going. Evolution Hour. Hello, this is RJ Downard, somebody who endeavors to flatten creationism at every turn. And here is the tortucanwordpress.com Troubles in Paradise project. Everybody help out and look at. Yes, and our friend Jackson Weed is here, so we can. Oh, whoops. And I've got to mute myself over here as usual. There we go. My bad. It doesn't allow you to mute before the show opens up, and I leave that the original Hangout going, or the live feed over in a corner, so I've got a window that deal with it, so I don't want to screw everything up on it. And you can't actually mute it. Hello, we got Old Scratch and Immutable Destiny and Travis Adams. Hi, gang. Whee! Anyway, for those of you who have been Hangouts on air is going away later this year for quick streaming by YouTube webcam. That's interesting. I'm not sure what that means. If anybody knows what that means, please let me know, because that's worrisome if it's going to change the way I'm doing stuff. So anybody that's in the feed or SciStrike or anybody else who knows what that's changing the circumstance, do I need to do things differently? I don't know. Anyway, remember, I'm an old fart novice. I'm from an era with 3 television networks and UHF and fine tuning on the televisions and rabbit ears and dial telephones and all of that stuff that's from the ancient world. And anyway, the major subject matter for the last weeks that hopefully has not been boring everybody to tears has been an analysis of contested bones, which is an attempt to apply source methods to look at how a creationist is constructing an argument at source level. This is the basic issue that I make a big deal about, which is anything you see, and it's not just in creationism or sciences or anything else. If you're watching a political discussion, anything else, ultimately it's relating to source data. And are you talking about official publications? Are you talking about somebody's editorial in a blog? Those are different. Well, the creationists, these are attempting to explain why human evolution is a crock. And it's documented relatively sparsely. At the moment, they've got something under 400 sources in the whole book, and they're averaging about 1.7 sources per page, which is pretty thin. There's a huge amount of repetition. Almost half of their stuff is just used for authority quotes. Of the technical citations they make, about half of them are misrepresented in that information that contradicts the point they're trying to make is not being discussed or suppressed. That's not good. And so from a methods point of view, it's delightful. I'll try to look at Shell Reptile, Contested Bones again. That book never ends. Well, I have to confess I'm going through it slowly because I have all my other tip work to do during the day, and also writing the Rocks Were There book, which takes up a ton of time to get all of, because it's a huge amount of active research. So I'm coming at the chapter analysis on the side. I do make a point of the things that I do encounter along the way, I then stick in as a reference point for these shows. For example, in this episode, we're going to be having some discussion of Kent Hovind and the wonderful world of lunar recession rates. And so the thing that I'm trying to get across as a lesson is that source methods involves you looking at the back end of the book or the bottom of the page for the source data as the most important thing in the work. And if they aren't delivering there, it doesn't matter how confident they are in what they're saying. They can be absolutely surefire, cocksure, absolutely positively claiming something. But if they don't have the documentation for it, they don't have the documentation for it. And that's what's painfully obvious in the new book, this 2017 work. The thing that they've been hammering away in this chapter, and it has involved having me checking out all the background source material, relates to their insistence that human beings, modern, anatomically modern us human beings, coexisted with Australopithecines that were just a strange ape thing. And that all of the tool use that was indicated and all of the supposedly human-like body parts that are found in fossils must actually be from human beings. And then they're also doing a little bit of a side swipe at the KBS Tuff issue, right at the beginning of this little section. I would have put links up to the things. Unfortunately, the Nature papers aren't open access. But if you go and hunt up KBS Tuff, you'll find an assortment of things that talk origins and others that has been a long-standing issue. The original papers were done back in the 1970s and 80s, which all involved trying to date these particular hominids, and there was volcanic ash above and below because it's a volcanic area. And that's, so you were trying to date the tuff. The problem is that there's been repeated ash flows, and stuff that was previous ash flows had gotten mixed down in landslides and wind and other factors and pushed in with the ash that was on top of this other area. So how are you dating what dates are you getting, and how are you dealing with argon contamination? And right up at the bat, the various papers that they were alluding to or not discussing, all related to the issues about argon contamination. There was a paper from 1970, radioisotopic age determinations of Lake Rudolph artifact site, which Rupe and Sanford cited, and it was by I think Fitch and Miller. And they were saying that one of the most intractable of these is the possible presence of extraneous argon derived from inclusions of pre-existing rocks. Duh, right up front. And did Rupe and Sanford allude to this? Nope. They suppressed the information. It's just inappropriate. Had I been able to find a full text example of this that you can glom onto, I would have put a link up to it directly. So I do beg off of being bad on that little point there. Lisa for Truth says, wait, they accept there were Australopithecines? Oh, yeah. Most of your upper level creationists and intelligent design people don't dispute that the taxa existed. In fact, they're pretty bland in kind of being okay, more or less, with the systematics as been done, unless it gets into the overlap category. So they don't like the idea that something could be an almost this or an almost that. So they want Australopithecines to be just apes. And if you read the lower level bottom feeder types, they'll just say, well, they're just like a chimpanzee, or they are just chimpanzees, which is just nonsense. Lucy is a chimpanzee. Pops up. Yeah, jump in there, Jackson.
Yeah, people who are making that, like Kent Hovind and all of his sheep, have absolutely no idea how hominid morphology looks at all. I mean, if you look, just look at the pelvis of a chimp versus Australopithecus afarensis versus us. Chimps have these tall pelvises, while humans have these very bowl-like pelvises, and the reason is that we are bipedal walkers, whereas chimps are quadrupeds predominantly. And interestingly, when you look at Australopithecines, theirs are kind of right in the middle. It's kind of flattened out, but it's also kind of bowl-shaped, which is exactly what you would expect on the transition from quadrupedality to bipedality.
And they will not discuss that. That what you want to do, you can spot it in the Rupe and Sanford book, and Jackson, I'm sure, in his analyses that he's been researching for human evolution aspects for the book, and rocks were there, and so have I, will notice what never comes up, which is what exactly would the fossil need to look like for them to classify it as a transitional form. You never get that. You find ways to pigeonhole. So they've got a pigeonhole Australopithecines on one side, and then the not quite part somewhere else, which is why they get into confusion. That some of the ones that are in that iffy area, Homo habilis in particular, they bounce all over the place as to where they categorize it. And you get into more and more difficulty with things the more you try to deal with the data field, and they're never going to make it fit. But the bottom feeder types that are coming in, and to some extent, Rupe and Sanford are bottom feeders. They're relying on other people's apologetics. They're not really coming up with a lot of original material, even though it's documented with a lot of older stuff. But I think they are scavenging through the literature that they've been seeing, and they don't want to cite the creationist arguments directly. There's only been a handful, 2 or 3. Lubenow was one that got referenced. I was amazed that Rupe and Sanford haven't even cited Todd Wood on Australopithecus sediba. They're ashamed of their baraminologists.
Well, the others are. Well, heck, Menton got into a fist fight with Todd Wood over that. There was it.
Yeah.
Purdom included a little snippet in an article she wrote on baraminology, how it hurts how creationists feel, because
poor little
can't be related
snowflake.
to sediba. That can't be right. And so,
you'll notice how on Ken Ham's roadshow with Purdom and Hodge, they don't call attention to these controversies on their apologetics.
No, they do not. It's really funny because we were just talking about that. Everything is hunky-dory over on their side, unless, of course, you actually start to read their side. We were talking about, because I just came across a section on meteors, and the articles with Ken Ham denying, as well as others like Elizabeth Mitchell and Paul F. Taylor, denying that meteors have ever struck the Earth, still exist and are available open access on Answers in Genesis. They're still out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those, like, you can't possibly argue that there haven't been meteor impacts on the Earth. We have got a huge technical literature on them all over the place. Oh, Immutable Destiny says, James Downard, so creationism is only how about the creationist feels? Oh, the truth at last. Well, with one of the sections that I just adore from Rocks Were There is the part on cognitum in the baraminology chapter. Cognitum is the idea that one of the things that you need to use to deal with creationist systematics is what popular opinion says about it. That if people in the grassroots don't think animal A and B are really the same, air quotes, kind, that you have to take that into consideration independent of what your baraminology analysis does. I was gobsmacked at that.
I was I was pretty well knocked over. I'm still overcoming how shocked I was. Shocked at that. Also, the making of the Purdom and Hodge made the crocoduck argument. I was pretty disappointed with that. If dogs and cats were related to each other, we should find dog-cat hybrids in the fossil record.
Yeah,
seriously?
Which is really lame. No geneticist of Georgia Purdom's credentials should make such a stupid statement. It's just absolute twaddle. Hodge, you expect him to make stupid statements because he doesn't know a damn thing. But Purdom has no excuse for that. And it's not something that pops up in the higher echelon. I don't think Nathaniel Jensen or something, of course, he's accepting transitional forms in the creationist lexicon, and you're going, what? He's making up his own creationism retroactively. He's hallucinating a non-existent creationist literature where they accepted transitional forms.
Well, I think that sort of historical reconstructionism is fairly normal in creation land, because they don't ever have a phase where they will humbly submit, we were wrong about this. They go straight from 0 to 100.
Todd Wood
we
will
disagree
be Todd Wood will be the squeaky wheel here, because he's kind of a scholarly type, and he'll actually remind people about some of this stuff. But it's only going to get worse. Creationists have flip-flopped totally on plate tectonics, and they were against continental drift back in the Henry Morris era, and they moved on in here. Oh, Lisa for Truth brings up, well, Kent thinks the craters on the moon were created by waters from the Earth. I can top that. In Henry Morris's 1972 book, which I got dangling around in here somewhere, that was passed out freebie from Jerry Falwell's bunch back in the 1970s, he told us that the craters of the moon were made when Archangel Michael fought with Satan and threw lightning bolts, and that's what formed the craters on the moon. If your socks are still on at this point, I would be surprised, because they certainly knocked my socks off when I read that back in the 70s.
In the next video, we're looking at a group who thinks the angels' battle with Satan and his minions killed the dinosaurs. So
you get this. Those are the bottom feeder, make it up as they go along crowd. That they don't really read much of the actual creationist literature, so they're kind of riffing And so they can just concoct a whole new lore. You found that in the Adventist group. It is not an Adventist doctrinal teaching that dinosaurs didn't exist. And yet you find an awful lot of homeschool Adventists carrying the trope that dinosaurs are just fake. And that's where it came from. I don't think anyone's actually been able to pin down, but it's like a little folk meme that percolated into the lexicon at some stage along the way, and like a viral meme replicating, continues to operate. But it's not a traditional one. Tornado in a Junkyard says, Kent thinks an ice comet 200 kilometers wide, tall and long, slammed into the Earth and didn't vaporize everything on the damn planet. Oh, he still... if for those of us who follow Kent Hovind jargon, there's the Hovind theory, he calls it in his videos, which is just warmed over ice canopy stuff from, oh God, I've forgotten the name of the guy back in the 1960s, but it's not his idea. And the ice canopy model or the vapor canopy, he kind of flip-flops back and forth as to which one he talks about, are both so lame that nobody in the upper echelon creationist astrophysics game pays any attention to this. The current buzzword now are the fountains of the deep thing. So they've got these giant hyper geysers in the model that are spitting up. Jackson has some stuff to do, so he'll be back hopefully a little bit later on. So you got me a solo on this one. But the whole structure, it's important to keep a historical perspective here. Whenever you hit a creationist video, don't forget that they're not often making up the stuff originally. They're copying somebody else. And it may or may not have a long tradition. And it may or may not go back a long way. The odds are, if you're hearing an old creationist, they're probably riffing off of stuff they learned when they were young creationists. So if you've got somebody that's my age, they may be repeating tropes that they were siphoning off of the Henry Morris era in the 70s and 80s. Whereas if you see some little young twerp like Matt Powell, he's riffing off of what he thinks creationism is in the modern era. So he's riffing off of Kent Hovind and some of these other things. Immutable Destiny. Do any creationists actually support Nephilim's idea of lunar bukkake? I'm not entirely sure what the lunar bukkake are, but
What?
Nephilim seem, I'm not entirely sure what that refers to. Can you be more clear in a non-lewd way to describe what that is? Oh, and speaking of Nephilim,
do we have to?
Nephilim wrote a response to my reptile mammal transition stuff in relation to the Kent Hovind video debate that I had. And we'll be discussing that in an upcoming episode. But shall we say Nephilim is continuing his tendency not to read the technical papers he cites?
I think I put Neff and James Cole in the same category of we should just kind of say, that's nice, son, run along.
Although they operate at way different levels. Cole is somebody with some technical training and does still publish in technical journals, although it's getting more and more obscure ones as time is going on. But Nephilim is just a doofus. He's somebody that just flails around. He's trying to argue that the developmental biology of our mammal jaw is totally unrelated and different from the reptile one. And he manages to cite nothing on this that conforms to his opinion. And he makes the mistake of actually citing the developmental biology thing from the University of New South Wales. I'll be putting all that crap up in the subsequent bit. But you've got to give Nephilim his usual A for bluster. He's Trumpian in his ability to just ramrod ahead with his conclusion and be absolutely certain that what he thinks is true, and it isn't.
Yeah, I can't stomach his talks for more than I think about 2 minutes at max. He's been on YouTube for like a decade now, and and it's just only gotten worse.
Yeah, Lavender Lady notes that Nephi thinks that a comet hit the Earth to cause the global flood, with water splashing back up to make the lunar craters. That sounds weirdly Paravelikovskian. He might be riffing off of a little bit of that stuff. It'd be lovely to see Korag says Nephilim believes in dirt to man magic, but abiogenesis and evolution are just impossible and illogical. Yeah, yeah, and the famous ribectomy that produces Eve. But then again, somebody that would seem that they ought to be more level-headed, like Hugh Ross, who's an old Earth creationist, he effectively accepts the same thing. He, in one of his books, he, with a straight face, is arguing about the scientific plausibility of God doing a biopsy from Adam's rib to generate the DNA to make Eve. And you're going,
why does it matter at that point? I mean, and really, in some sense, why does it matter? Why do they have to make naturalistic explanations at all? At the end of the day, creationism is founded
it's magic.
On magic.
Why not just go with it? Yeah.
Why not?
Well, because there's the lure for scientism. That this is stuff that's been the case for the last couple hundred years. The idea that things will have scientific explanations, they'll have scientific grounding, and they want there to be that. And the one that really jump-started all of this was George McCready Price, who, by the way, I was amused in a debate. I think it was with Godless Engineer and Kent Hovind, where somebody brought up in the live chat questions, they wanted something about George McCready. And I was going, it's George McCready Price. His last name is Price. It's not George McCready. He was the geologist from the Adventist, self-taught, who was writing books in the 1920s all the way down to the 1950s. I think he died in 1959. And he was pushing Adventist flood geology, which then influenced Henry Morris and that gang. So that in all of these cases, there's provenance to stuff. Sometimes it's recent, sometimes it's not. Most people don't invent things out of thin air. There are a few that just invent their creationism on the fly, but most of them are drawing off of videos or books they've read or lectures they've heard or tropes they've gotten secondhand from somewhere else. And it's the job of the method scholar to try to ferret out where they're getting their stuff from. Now, in many cases, you're going to hit a superficial dry well when you ask somebody who doesn't have a good memory to begin with and doesn't write the damn thing down where they're getting their sources from, and you'll just get the deer in the headlight, ding, and nothing will be forthcoming on it. But in some cases, people will be a little more forthcoming, and that's why a written record is so important. Or in the case of videos, if they put the little reference up in the PowerPoint, which Kent Hovind often does, that's how you can track things down. I'll go ahead and get my shameless plug out of the way first, and then we can get on to all the delightful material about Kent Hovind and lunar recession here. Let me get my thingy up here. Close off some little windows, and there we go. And let's see, get the Patreon thing over here and that over there. It's a busy time wrangling with all the data field that comes in. And sometimes I get frazzled from all of the incoming flow. I've still got masses of material that still need to be integrated into the system. And I'm trying to triage as to which material is going to go into the new book and which stuff is going to go into other stuff. So if I occasionally sound a little bit frazzled, it's because I'm occasionally frazzled. It's possible to do. And now I'm waiting for that document to close. I should have closed off my reference bibliography before I started up on this thing. The video format that I'm using here on my computer is kind of a memory hog. And so I try to close down as many of the windows as I can, but I do have Word going because I've got my little thing going here. And now I'm attempting to close off my TIFF reference base, which is, after all, about 3,000 pages long. So it's a fairly large document file and constantly growing because of all of that work that I have to keep track of. There's a method behind all that madness, though, and that is, while I'm waiting for the file to close, it's the whole point behind the TIP project is to document at source level where creationists are getting their arguments from. And this has not been adequately done before. There's been aspects of it that was done at Talk Origins, if you look at the Quote Mine project, things like that. But they were looking at it from a narrow issue. They would bring up the stupid quote and one or two examples of creationists repeating the stupid quote. They haven't gone to the next level, which is, what if you had a listing of everybody that's made the stupid quote? Now you can trace patterns of behavior and parasitism that you wouldn't be able to spot otherwise. And you don't have to do it for everything. I'm not doing it for everything, but certain litmus test issues are really relevant. There's a couple examples of non-existent quotes. I'm alluding to it in the new Rocks book. One of them is an Arthur Keith quote. To show you how the daisy chain works, Jackson had brought up a reference about whether or not the appendix was vestigial or not. And it was from an old 1912 paper by Arthur Keith. And he was arguing that it was not vestigial. Well, bringing up Arthur Keith brings up Arthur Keith. Arthur Keith was related to the Piltdown matter. He was a Piltdown supporter. He had a lot of racist attitudes that made him rather a questionable character in the 1920s and 1930s. So all of that then brings up matters. Well, there was one quote that was favored by creationists that Arthur Keith was supposed to have said in 1959 that evolution was unprovable. And the problem is he never said it. It's a fictional, imaginary quote. And so everybody that repeats that quote, including Kent Hovind used it in his doctoral dissertation, and he did it in books in the 2007 period, and I'm sure it may pop up again if anybody keeps an eye out for Kent Hovind and you see him using this Arthur Keith 1959 evolution is disproven quote, unprovable quote, but special creation has to be rejected. Then you can spot that you've got an authority quote that doesn't exist to begin with. And those can be really useful litmus tests because nobody can legitimately quote a non-existent quote. They have to have gotten it from somewhere secondarily. Okay, so I finally got my word processor down here to where I've got just the file I want to open up. Let's put on the shameless plug. Let's do our screen share, blah, blah, blah. RJ hunting for the share button as usual. The complication part, there we go. And there's our share. Thanks everybody who are patrons for the project, who have actually plunked down real live hard cash as a recurring basis. This is something that is so important at my level of Social Security that this really has made a difference. And it doesn't resolve all my financial bumps, but it makes the monthly thing way less panic-stricken than it was before. So we have our colleagues, Hendril and Puffalophagus and Eric Rowley and Cyrus, and then our researcher level, Travis and Convertby and Eat Meal and Brad and Ralph and Palogia and Ugly German Truths. Oh, but German Truths are not always ugly. Tsur Weisbaum, and then our assistant researchers, Duranku and James and Nana and Benjamin Simpson and Totas Real, and our friends Daniel and Stephen and Marigale and Insects Are Cool, who is right here in the room, and Morton Nielsen's in the room, thank you, and Bo and Staggles and Alex and Paul and Zeshi and legacy patrons. These are people who helped at some point and weren't able to continue, but I still remember. Jan and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Daniel and Sun Sky Stone and Everett. Every one of you has helped out in one way or another, and everyone who can continue to help or join the parade, if you've got a few bucks to spare a month and you can plunk it down, everything adds up. So there's my main website, tortuganwordpress.com. Make sure you make use of that material. There's a lot of stuff that I had done over the years on that, and I'm very proud of all the work that I've done there. And download the damn stuff. Use it. 3 macroevolutionary episodes is a whole book-length thing that covers a lot of these matters. And then, of course, the newer books that I'm doing for sale are covering that as well. And you can become a patron at patreon.com/downwardtip. And also donate directly the same way. You can do recurring payments, anything like that, at gofundme.com/DCGo. And there are links to that at the website, tortuganwordpress.com. And so there is the shameless plug. And now we can close that one off. We've got the part 2 episode, which relates to, and I will also call attention to my book, Evolution Slam Dunk. June has not been a happy month for book sales, and so I will have to plug here. And then if you like fiction, Paralogs of Phileas Fogg, everybody who has got my books already, let people know about it. If you haven't written a rating or review at wherever you got it from, like Amazon, please do so. Once in a while, creationists troll that and put up bad reviews, so they give 1 or 2 stars, and that drops the average down. And so I'd like to have as many people as possible call attention to these things. I'm proud of both works. If you can plunk down and give both at once, if you're both a Jules Verne steampunk fiction aficionado and a science groupie, which if you're in my demographic, that's not necessarily implausible, and you can afford to get both of them. If you want to acquire copies for your local library, that's another way of helping out on things and spreading the word. And if there are people that you know who could get them for birthday gifts, that they would welcome that. Anything in the thing. So there's the shameless plug from the writer on ways to get the June book sales up from crickets to a bit more. The royalties on that can make a difference as well. And I get more than that than if I were publishing through a regular publisher, because I get to decide what the price is. And so that actually is magnified compared to how many books I would have to sell if I were running at the moment through a regular publisher, although I would still like to do that. So anyway, that's the shameless plug on there. Evolution Slam Dunk and the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg. I'm working on the sequel to Fogg as we speak, and also The Rocks Were There, which is the co-author book that Jackson Wheat and I are writing, which we have been alluding to these past weeks, and which we are going to be really happy about, because we are really kicking butt in this volume. Would you not agree?
Oh yes, it covers an insane amount of material, of literature, of creationist arguments. This is going to be, I think you could get an entire look at the creation evolution sphere just by reading this. You will get you'll get both sides of the argument, because we are constantly quoting them, we're constantly showing what material we're citing, and so you're really getting both sides of this, and you can see that evolution always comes out on top. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, and it's not merely, although we are filleting a colossal number of young Earth creationists, not only the Answers in Genesis gang, but Kent Hovind gets his side swipes and all that along the way as well. But we're also bringing in the Intelligent Design gang, because they trip over a lot of these same issues that are being brought up by Answers in Genesis. So this is going to be just a cornucopia of material. And if you know diddly squat about the creation evolution issue, Rocks Were There is going to pull you up to speed on the whole sweep of the thing, and you'll know a hell of a lot about the players in that on a scale that I don't think anybody has pulled together in a book before.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, and there are a lot of good places where you can go and look at individual arguments, but no one's really pulling it. It's not just the arguments, it's the history of the arguments, and you get to see how the arguments themselves and the people promoting them changes over time. So that's also fun.
Yeah, it's fun to find out. Just as an example, I was delighted to have done additional research on the vestigial organ issue as it was developing in the 19th century. And it turned out to be way more interesting and fascinating than you would ever get if all you did was rely on the cartoon version that the creationists offer.
Oh yeah, yeah. The for instance, the appendix, Menton makes this point. I say point. He just kind of throws an assertion that, how many people got their appendix removed simply because they thought it did nothing? Who has the time or the money or the desire to get an appendectomy just for funsies? Who?
Yeah. And you'll notice Menton never offered any evidence that anyone had ever had their appendix removed preemptively. In other words, the only reason why you have an appendix out is because you have appendicitis. And and ironically, not everybody who gets appendicitis has their appendix removed, because they were having a chemical technique that was dealing with it by the 1940s and 50s, which was mentioned in the technical literature. So not only was Menton making a bold assertion, it was a wrong one, that nobody was getting their appendix taken out willy-nilly, like, hey, fashion statement, I think I'll go into the hospital and have my appendix taken out and then go to the hairdresser.
Yeah,
or get my haircut.
I didn't have mine taken out because it's useless or because I thought it was useless. It was trying to kill me. So,
Yeah, and that was particularly ironic because, as we note in the book, during the course of writing this book, Jackson suffered an appendicitis attack.
Yeah, so it was just it was lunacy. Minton's kind of funny because he actually takes apart a joke. I don't know if you've gotten to that point yet, but he takes apart
that it was clearly he authority quotes Alfred Romer. That Romer was obviously just making a little light piece of humor in the text. It was not a technical argument or anything like that. And he nicked a couple lines out of a single paragraph. That's another one where I consolidated the text because I just think here is the original thing. So I put both of Minton's side swipes together, and then you get to read the original.
Yeah, he double dips. He takes the setup and the punchline and treats them as two separate quotes and puts them at different places in his chapter. It's the same thing.
The worst case of double dipping is one, I can't remember whether it was Nathaniel Jensen or Tompkins, or one of those, but they were talking about this particular technical issue, and they cited a technical paper, and then they cited another technical paper on the same subject, except it was the same one they had just cited.
Oh,
so they're treating the same paper as two completely separate issues when they're not.
That was the orphan gene one, wasn't it?
Yeah. The orphans in a storm. Orphan genes are a wonderful topic. It pops up occasionally in the anti-evolution literature, and just in case they try to bring it up anymore, they're going to have to get past the material that we've assembled for the new Rocks book, because we just tear it to shreds.
Yeah, which kind of goes for everything where we'll be looking at. One of the things I really loved about this is RJ's former nonfiction book, Evolution Slam Dunk, is about the reptile mammal transition, and the first chapter leans heavily on the reptile mammal transition. I just kind of love how we have that kind of callback.
Building on that work to where it says if you want more details, just go to the damn book and find out about it. Oh, and it was delightful just today. That video that you linked to, the public broadcasting one about the synapsids, that was so delightful. The narrator mentioned the coprolites, where they had found evidence of mammal hair showing up way back in the Permian. Well, I spotted that back when the papers just came out and had called attention to that in Slam Dunk. It was real cutting edge material, and Christine Janis, the paleontologist, hadn't been aware of that information and was so delighted with it that she was going to include it in her new book on mammals. And now, of course, we've seen it discussed in a 2019 thing. So I can kind of pat my back on that of being pretty damn good on keeping up with the technical literature to make sure that rocks are there will be ridiculously up to date on all of the relevant material on here. That this will be if you're at the college level, just like Slam Dunk, it will be useful to you, and it will also be a fun read because we're writing in a conversational style. But then we have our little digressionary footnotes where we can dump on you. Says, well, if you want to find out a little bit more about this, here are the technical papers that you can look up on that and follow up.
And in some senses, we have those and they're useful, but they exist because they're not getting drawn on by the anti-evolutionists. They are literally being left out. The whole bit on what was it? It was the when North and South America connected up, the biotic interchange.
Oh, the Isthmus of Panama.
Yeah, it's just kind of bumped into in the baraminology chapter when they're talking about the cognitum for pigs and peccaries. But there's this huge. You can't just say, oh, pigs and peccaries are together. There's this whole biogeographic issue, which only becomes compounded when you add other organisms. But for them alone, they're in Eurasia, dispersed into Africa, but also in North America, and then down into South America when the Isthmus of Panama formed. And all we can say is, yes, there's more stuff here, but we don't really have time to go into it because this will take us too far afield. We did that, I think, for
Well,
the Cambrian.
and Antarctica is a classic example. When you go back farther into the dinosaur period and earlier, when Antarctica was parked down where it is now, but Australia was connected to it in the big Pangea supercontinent, and so was South America. And evolutionists, when they were starting to look into this area, you know, Antarctica is not the most convenient place to dig. It's kind of cold and awkward to get to, but nonetheless, evolutionary models could predict if you've got Antarctica here and Australia parked next to it and South America over here, and you know animals are living in Australia and other animals are in South America, well, duh, the only way they can get from one to the other is across Antarctica. So they're able to interpolate the animals and plants that would have had to have lived in Antarctica. And lo and behold, when they start digging there, they discover they actually existed there in the right time frame. Well, who'd have thunk?
Yeah, the little microbiotheres, the marsupials were one of those groups where the debate was going on for a long time as to whether they crossed through Africa or Antarctica to go from South America to Australia. And microbiotheres were found in Antarctica, exactly where they should be.
Yeah. Oh, Michael Apple says Jackson's videos rock. Less than 10 minutes to get the skinny on major issues on cladistics, genetics, bloody wonderful. I agree completely. If you aren't subscribed to Jackson's videos, you should, because you do splendid jobs. They're always compact, tidy. They typically run around 10 or 15 minutes. They're beautifully illustrated. You always do your bloody damn homework. He sends me his scripts to vet, and I can tell you it is annoying, because I'm always finding so much wonderful new science I didn't know about because of what you've been doing in your material. And then I also try to make life annoying for him by bringing up additional material that he may not have been aware of in some of these side issues. So between the two of us, we always come out of these things knowing more than we came in with.
Yeah, it is awesome. And we also have Nestlig and Rational Mind and Christopher.
Oh, Nestlig, holy moly. His section on turtles was just gobsmacking.
Yeah, he did a really fantastic job on the turtle script.
In fact, I had to print that out for my reference points because it's such a beautiful summary of the ups and downs and ins and outs of turtle evolution. And it does with such clarity that, you know, I'm always impressed by that. I'm a historian by nature, and I'm not trained in the sciences, so I'm diligent and perniciously persistent, but nevertheless, this is an area that I've had to learn. And so people who have that as their field, where they're doing it on their own already, that are good explainers and coordinators, those are great people to have. And you want to connect up people who can do really good video descriptions, that can do them concisely, that present all this material. And then you want to provide as much in the way of primary source material that's easily linkable, so that anybody that watches them can follow up on their own. So you don't have to say, well, you take my word for it. No, it's exactly the opposite, that you want people to be sparked. You won't necessarily do it on everything, but there may be something where you really love that particular critter or that particular geological issue or that cosmological matter, and you're suddenly going, wow, ooh, I didn't know about that, and you're spurred to follow up on it. And that's the whole essence of creating a network, a science strike force network of people that collectively have the facts straight and know how to exchange information easily between one another. And we can communicate this medium. We can communicate on Twitter. We can send messages to one another saying, do you know about this thing? And we check back and forth. Pelagia sends his stuff out to be vetted and all the rest, and we connect up on things. So everybody gets better and better and better. And that puts the opponents at a disadvantage, because we know their game better than they do. We know our game way better than they do. And we can just squeeze them in between and have whatever leaks out onto the floor be what's left of the creationist worldview, because they're never going to be able to play on the facts level.
No, you're right. They don't. And anyone and everyone will get to see that when we finish the Rocks book. It's our chapters are just really, we don't even go through, it's not like we're just copying everything they say. We're taking snippets of what they say in their chapters or in their papers or whatever, and then we're explaining all the technical details. And so when we have to explain the technical stuff, it ends up being way longer than their material.
The other issue is that we are taking full court press. In other words, effectively every germane point that the creationists are bringing up in their argument, we are addressing and obliterating. So it's not a matter of, well, you didn't talk about that. Oh, yes, we did. We're going all the way down this. A Tornado and Junkyard said, didn't you completely ruin Kent's playbook, James Downard? At the risk of back patting myself, yes. I put the link in the video description to my debate with Kent Hovind because I'm very proud of it. I think I handled myself there in a way that Kent will probably never want to be caught in the same video debate with me ever again. And so if that's my job has been done. Earlier, I think, Lisa for Truth says Antarctica is so cold because of the ocean currents. At least that's what I've heard. Yes, and that is another thing that confirms the standard geological picture, because Antarctica wasn't quite so cold, and the planet wasn't quite so cold up until fairly recently. And the point is that back when Australia was connected to Antarctica, what happens is that when you look at the ocean distributions, currents had to go all the way up and around Australia, which brought them into the tropics. So what you ended up with is the circumpolar current system, this giant underwater river that forms from the way water and thermoclines and that function in an ocean system would warm up. And so it tended to warm up everything. So the planet was relatively warm until eventually Australia pulled far enough away from Antarctica that it reached the stage where suddenly the current switched and the circumpolar current occurred that went around Antarctica all on its own. And that meant it's in the cold all on its own. And the whole global temperature started going. Another factor that entered into it was the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, which was around in that period too. And it closed off the North and South America, which disconnected the Atlantic and the Pacific. So these lateral warm currents along the tropics no longer could do that. So they switched the dynamic. And those two things acted as a double whammy, and we went into Ice Age cycle.
Yes. The entirety of the Cenozoic has been much colder. That's why it's been the oceans, if I remember correctly, have been predominated by aragonite instead of calcite as the main carbonate, if I remember correctly, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. Andy Lord says, don't be modest, RJ. You backpat all you like because your destruction of Kent was beautiful. And what I deliberately call attention to the fact that it's a source methods approach. That everybody should remember what source method is. There's philosophy, there's data floor, and there's source methods. Source methods is where your opponent gets their sources from, where you get your sources from. Do you fact check your sources? Do you have standards of evidence? Do you are attempting to offer the best case argument, sufficient and necessary information, or not? And Kent has been let slide in an awful lot of his debate context because debaters are coming at it talking about philosophy and maybe bumping into a few data points. And Kent, who gish gallops at 900 miles an hour in his arguments, and he's rattling off factoids right and left, and he's super confident. I come at it from knowing what his arguments are to begin with, already having explored that. Bill Ludlow has done things in that mode. Pelagia has done matters in that mode. He's not as quick on the debating format, but he approaches things from a source methods direction when he does his videos. And far too many people get into these debates with creationists without paying attention to all three of those levels in preparation. And it shows that when you have a matter where you're kind of embarrassed that the evolution defender isn't up on their game, well, it's because they're not doing this. And I'm trying to show by example exactly how it works. Don't debate somebody that you're unfamiliar with their argument. Don't debate somebody on a topic that you haven't really researched all that well. If so, please go home and read. Don't debate. This is not your forte.
You're right. The debates I've seen on Modern Day Debates channel, I like his channel a lot, but he's fair. He's genuinely a fair guy. He lets standing run wild though with these people who one guy was like a physicist or something like that, or a physics major or something like that. But these people don't know about evolution, and Standing knows that, and he just wants to make them look bad.
Well, and that was what was so funny because he really does like debating somebody he hasn't debated with before. So
Yeah.
the odds are, if they're not coming at it from a source methods direction, they will be unfamiliar with his oeuvre. Well, that debate that he was going to have on dinosaurs and human beings coexisting, at the very last minute, the guy had a family emergency, and Modern Day Debate called me an hour before the debate, said, well, could you come in and do this? Oh, we could postpone it for another week if you don't have time to prepare. Oh, no, I don't need time to prepare on this one. And suddenly Standing had to decide, did he want to actually go ahead debating with me, or did he want to pull out at the last minute? Because I was not going to give up on this one. And if you look at my debate on that point, I think I handled myself very well on that occasion too.
He got hilariously crushed, and of course he mirrored the video on his channel, and his
a bit of it, short bit of it, just 20 minutes of it.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, his little Hovind sheeple were all patting him. I was like, oh, RJ interrupted him. It's like, yeah, because he doesn't know anything, and it's embarrassing to watch him not know anything.
Oh, and I had a big back and forth because I got a lot of side comments when I discovered that one. I jousted with them on the sites asking about the material on this. You know, it's just that the upshot of it was that Standing had a long PowerPoint of where he repeats a slew of evidence in air quotes, that dinosaurs and human beings coexisted. He couldn't present the simple issue, which is actual examples of dinosaurs and people coexisting in the paleontological record, because there aren't any. So he had to go this secondary cryptozoology route. There are pictures of things that must be dinosaurs. And it was just terrible because he was heavily reliant on one particular source, this Vance Nelson guy, who suffers from cranial blockage of the rectum. This guy is a credulous git. And he was drawing off of material that was terrible. Standing himself veered away from defending the Cambodian stegosaur. And at one point, I was just delighted when he was saying, well, RJ brings up the Cambodian stegosaur. No, you brought up the Cambodian stegosaur. I pointed out that it was invalid. And so he's backing off from his material. But this one example that he had of this Yarra painting of a plesiosaur being hunted by Australian Aborigines, that was a painting made in the 1990s. It wasn't ancient Aboriginal art, and it was painfully obvious. Even Answers in Genesis ended up admitting that it was probably copied from an old kid's book showing what a plesiosaur was looking like, because everything about it was the pose, the number of flippers that were visible, the neck curve, everything about it was based on that. It was not a real painting. It wasn't proof that some poor Aborigine 10,000 years ago was seeing a living plesiosaur. Sorry. And yet you just couldn't get Standing to admit that he was a bad scholar, that he was a credulous person who was relying on credulous people who were relying on other credulous people. You can't get him to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing because he has this sort of hyper skepticism when it comes to anything that disagrees with him. Then hyper credulity when it comes to anything that agrees with him. It's just the flip flop is astounding,
and that's the core essence of the Tortugan mind. Is they have an infinite capacity to ignore evidence they don't want to be true, and an infinite credulity on stuff they want to be true. They are gullible as all get out. And Standing, of course, who is I put him at a higher level than some bottom feeders. He's actually above Kent Hovind's level in some ways, because he's meticulous at memorization. Every time in one of his debates, I'm expecting him to trot out the created heterozygosity and the rescue devices. He's got his tropes. He's got his things. He can spew his little factoids from Nathaniel Jensen and all the rest. I mean, I got to give him props for diligent stenography and memory, but he disintegrates at the source level. And the moment you try to press him, fact check your sources, did you? You discover that he will never engage on what he does for fact checking. I've never seen him. He insists he does, but I've never seen him give an example of what he meant by that, because I don't think he does.
Oh, I mean, heck, it was hilarious listening to you guys. He's like, oh, I got it from this book I have. And you said, do you have it? Go get it. And he's like, oh, yeah. Well,
yeah, go get the book. And I had to prod him to go get the damn book because I wanted to write down what the damn book was. And I wanted to check out whether it was valid. He didn't want to defend his own source. If you're proud of your damn source, you should be proud of it. You should say, oh, it's from Vance Nelson's book. I've got it. Anybody that follows me on Twitter will notice the circumstances when somebody brings up, there's one couple creationists, Hacking and a few others, I think, who have brought up Stephen Meyer's stuff, either Darwin's Dilemma or Signature in the Cell. And there's a few others on some of these other books. And I say, oh, I have those. I'll be happy to discuss the contents. Would you like to get it? I have it. Let's discuss them. Tell us what page you claim this factoid is on, and let's go with it. And whoop, they never come back on that.
Yeah, it's kind of the same when I laid out the baraminology challenge several weeks ago. I had one person actually show interest, but then he said
temporarily.
Nah. And I said, if you have any friends, feel free to tell them I'm here. It's out there.
And then he backed out at the last minute on there. Yeah, it's very curious because an idea worth having is one worth defending. You will notice that I am not Mr. Shyness when it comes to defending the evolutionary worldview, from dinosaurs to reptile mammal transition to the geology and the cosmology and every area that I'm interested in. I am not a shrinking violet on this point. And although Jackson has a much more affable temperament, I think, than I have. Nonetheless, you aren't a shrinking violet either when it comes to this stuff. You are proud of what you understand, and you're perfectly willing to explain it, and you don't need any prodding to do so.
That is true. We did the stream we did last week with Karis, where we were talking about books with nice visuals and all that, and I got up, went over, and picked up the Prehistoric Life, which I have over here around the shelf.
Yeah, which is an excellent compendium. It's got an awful lot of stuff, and it's quite. It's got some very good cutting edge material in it. Even though I think it's like 2009, you may have a more recent edition than I have. Oh, Immutable Destiny asked, when did Standing try to go into plant history? I don't think he has.
To what?
Plant history.
What about plant history?
He was asking whether Standing for Truth had ever tried to go into plant history. I'm not aware of it.
I probably not. I mean, his thing is if Nathaniel Jensen didn't utter it, then it's probably not in Standing.
Then it doesn't exist. Yeah. And neither one. Well, actually, the closest they could get here, I suppose, Sanford technically was a plant biologist. So he would theoretically be able to venture into that area, but even he doesn't seem to veer into it. And over in the quasi-intelligent design side, Richard Buggs is a plant geneticist. Tornado says, you're not a shrinking violet, you're a shrieking violent tornado. Coming from a tornado, that's a compliment. Yeah. Well, I can occasionally get my little dander up, and Nephilim can literally make me lose my temper because he's such an intractable jerk. But there are others who are polite and pleasant, and you can have a chat with them. No, Mike Riddle was perfectly affable, clueless as all get out, but nonetheless perfectly affable. You can have an actual conversation with him. Standing pretends to be affable, but he can be pretty nasty, snarky beyond that, and you can't get him to engage. Look how tough it was for me to get him to engage on the matter of that damn Yara painting, that he didn't want to investigate it to source level, whereas that's what you need to do. And in effect, both Jackson and I are engaging at source level investigations on each other's work. And in effect, when you read a technical paper and you're looking for technical issues, you're doing source methods analysis because you're looking at a technical paper and you're finding out, well, what does it have to say about this TSFF2G gene or not? And so you're working your way down through there and you go, oh, now that's the issue that we're really dealing with. And it's citing these technical papers and you're looking them up and yeah, they say exactly that point and blah, blah, blah. And so you're constantly reinforcing that real science will always be relying on its sources rigorously and not suppressing information and aware of all the pitfalls. Whereas the pseudo scholarship of the creationist is they're citing for ammunition, they're citing for little bliptoids, They're suppressing relevant information. That's why reading the originals is not their friend. The more you look up the original source material, the more likely you're going to be to spot the information they're leaving out. And when you find this is not a casual foible, this is not a, well, yeah, they misrepresented that time. No, it's they're misrepresenting all the time.
Yeah, that's true. It's with Stand Against, he just won't come back, it seems. We've both asked him for more engagements. I've actually asked him to his face for multiple engagements, or for more engagements, and he said no. I've asked him through Modern Day Debate. He also told Modern Day Debate no.
The very last one, this dinosaur one, there were so many questions, and poor James gets inundated with these questions, and he's kind of a slow reader on the air. He's not a flip person on that.
Well, he's got a lot of stuff to take care of while he's running these things.
And he's got to maintain stuff and all that, and he's sitting there in the car and trying to keep track. And as somebody who's hunting around for the little green button to click, I should not complain in this area. But the thing is that it was brought up, the idea, why one of the people in the live chat said, why can't we have a whole show of Q&A? And I go, yeah. And theoretically, Standing said yes. So Modern Day Debate, please set it up that we have fielded questions from the audience, nothing but Q&A, and everybody gets to answer them, and we can discuss all this and have kind of a conversation and a discussion on that point, and we can then follow up with source material and all that. And please, next time, give me a goddamn wrench so I can put up links. Immutable Destiny says, recently Nephilim has tried to claim protein formation is impossible because the chance of it happening is too low. He appears to believe matter is in chemistry are random. I think he's been lobbing around that 10 to the 77th number that Steve Meyer has been pushing up. And of course, when you try to pin him down for sources, he just scampers off on that. But yeah, it's one of these. Nobody thinks proteins form by chance.
Nobody.
That they are the ineluctable process of chemical processes and other factors that are generating by natural means the components that eventually become the protein system that we're familiar with billions of years later, or at least of the form that's eventually in Luca. And so the idea that a 500 amino acid protein just is supposed to just come together like the tornado in a junkyard analogy, you can calculate the odds of that happening. Go right ahead. Nobody thinks that's how it forms. Now, you can legitimately argue, do we have the things pinned down as to how all those proteins generated? No, it's still an ongoing process. But don't wave that damn by chance protein formation number, because it's irrelevant to the argument.
I mean, anyone who takes it is inexcusable for anyone to take an organic chemistry class or a biochemistry class and come away thinking that protein formation is random, or that any coming together of organic molecules is random. That is
or that any of the abiogenesis researchers are depending on random formation of proteins.
Yeah,
this is exactly the opposite of where they're going on that. Immutable Destiny brings up that reading source material can be rough because the language is highly technical. I've mentioned this in previous episodes. Don't be intimidated by that. Although it may be seemingly on the surface a lot of jargon related. Well, of course, duh. That's true of legal briefs. It's true of any discipline that has anything. It would be true of working in an auto mechanics environment where you're talking about all the different little features and gaskets and all the other stuff in there. That would be specialized jargon. But it's not magic. And there will be review papers that you can look at. You can come at it at a variety of levels. If you are wanting to get the training wheel wading pool approach, read material from Carl Zimmer, Ed Wong, stuff at Scientific American and National Geographic, and a lot of the summary papers. Subscribe to Scientific American. That's a perfectly fine overview thing, where they'll get people who are expert in the fields to give general descriptions of things. They're referring to the technical literature. They're using a lot of the jargon terms and explaining what they mean. That's a good introductory level. Now, then, if you want to get to the next level of more technical introductory level, Then annual reviews is just a beautiful window, because these are written by experts in the field. They're for a technical audience, but they're also generic, embracing, explaining the state of the art kind of stuff. And after you've gotten the training wheel thing at the Scientific American level, the annual reviews, and there's annual reviews of genetics, annual reviews of ecology and evolution. There's a whole tons of them. Long list. Don't be intimidated by how many journals there are. You get over that too. I think I've got at the moment something on the order of 1,970 technical journals that I have drawn from in one form or another. That's bigger than the number of sources listed in Rupe and Sanford's book by almost an order of magnitude.
There are some of these journals are just so hilariously specialized. Like we came upon the Journal of like memories or lactation or something like that for chapter 1 on the monitoring issue. And so it's like, or there's a journal on Euglena, just the species,
just on that, just one organism. Yeah. I think there's a journal all about Volvox too.
Probably, I wouldn't doubt that. Yeah.
And so you get these, and this is what is intimidating is, and even I can get in my frazzled mode by it, is that there's such a sea of science going on today that you can easily be swamped by it. So I try as best as possible to triage so that I can navigate through this area. I'm doing multiple things at the same time. When I'm jousting with creationists and they bring up a topic that I'm not aware of, or the latest twaddle from Answers in Genesis or the Discovery Institute, and if it's relevant, if they cite technical literature in it, that goes into the tip mill. So I have a standard of approach on this to track down what the material is to get that measurement. That's another thing that I'm doing that nobody's done before, ever, as far as I can tell, which is actually measuring the whole range of anti-evolution use of primary source citation. And that means, although it's a constantly expanding boundary, you're getting a general heuristic so that you're ending up with roughly 10% of the active data field is being dealt with seriously at the anti-evolution level, which means they're missing 90% of the data field. And I'm not guessing at this, I'm measuring it. So if you need another reason to support the tip work, in addition to the evolution hour and the fact that I'm generating books and that there's the stuff at tip, there's the behind the scenes work that goes on daily with this. I'd love eventually, I'm going to drop dead eventually. I want to have people pick up where I left off because I don't want this project to stop. I want it to continue on as an ongoing research modality that will be keeping track of this and acting as a clearinghouse and an interconnection media. And that means eventually I've got to train a successor and have people that will do websites and do all these other little shtick and be good at explaining stuff. Maybe you will eventually do this. I don't know, Jackson or somebody else. I'd maybe not have even met them yet. But nevertheless, it's a thing that keep in mind that I don't want this to fizzle out with me to where, well, yes, Troubles in Paradise was the thing that the old dead guy, James Downer, did while he was alive. No. I want this to be a continuing process that I will have got the ball rolling, but I don't want the ball ever to stop rolling. So there. Let's see what else going on
exactly.
Here. Yeah. Lisa for Truth says, I generally stay with neuroscience, psychology, psychobiology, anthropology, and archaeology, but that's a lot of journals. Indeed it is. And I'll tell you, Lisa, that's an area that is almost completely invisible to the anti-evolutionists. That neuroscience area is just something they don't think about. They'll offer philosophical arguments for the soul and consciousness, but they're not paying attention to what's going on in the neuroscience. Again, I'm measuring that in TIP. And all I need to do is to look at the long column of technical literature in a particular subtopic and then go over to the, here's what's been cited by anti-evolutionists, and you have to go way up in the spreadsheet to get to the end of their thing. Sometimes it's only a few hundred articles that have been cited in total, compared to 1,000 or more in the technical literature that I've bumped into. So if I, lowly schlub, have encountered this material at this level, just imagine how much more detailed the actual full technical thing is. If you encounter everything, then you bring in every possible relevant technical citation, and that makes it even worse. So that 90% value is, I think, a good rough heuristic that how can you possibly lay claim to offer a viable alternative to evolution when you're missing 90% of the data field. Doesn't work. Right at the gate. And that's a source methods issue before you get to the data floor and way before you get to the philosophical end of it. Well, we're past the hour on here. We've got some things in. There's some issues that came up about codons that create protein. That's a whole issue on itself. Is proteins automatically fold. They do their thing purely by chemistry. They're just now starting to figure out how to anticipate how proteins fold.
They make little
so that if you have a sequence of DNA, can you predict what it will fold into, and can you predict ultimately what it will do biologically? So this relates to designer proteins that have been coming up and artificial proteins, and bit by bit they're advancing, but it's still an immensely complicated task. The other important issue, and I did a whole thing on abiogenesis where I brought up some of this stuff. There's a good argument to be made that when life originated, it did not involve triplet codons, that it didn't involve codons at all, and that the codon system, where you have particular nucleotides in DNA that are associated ultimately with matching up with amino acids that are then used by this weird little modified RNA molecule, the ribosome, that plugs them together to make proteins. That's a clue that there was a protein assembler thing that was going on in the RNA world before the DNA part got latched onto it, possibly as a parasite. That's part of the latest trending thinking, that the idea that DNA was a parasitical thing, that because it's more stable, that RNA molecules break down more easily than DNA does. And so there's that, it's like the parasite that's got stability, and it gradually starts dominating this hypercycle thing that's going on probably 100 billion years or more before Luca. It's long before you have the conventional cell system that we're used to. The other issue is how many proteins were involved and what did they consist of? And the point is that there may not have been triplet based. There may have only been duplexes, smaller protein set, amino acid set, smaller size core protein units. If you look at the duplex coding framework that's buried inside of the codon triplet system, that the amino acids that are encoded for those are the ones that are most easily synthesized prebiotically, and they're the most commonly used in existing proteins. Clue? I think so, but it's still an ongoing question. How does that sound, Jackson?
Well, we did talk about designer proteins and very early amino acid sets in creationist statistics. We talked about how it just so happens that the most primitive amino acids also form hydrophobic, hydrophilic regions.
Which is at the core of lipid membranes and the idea of cell structures where you have the inside versus the outside. This stuff has deep roots.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and if you look at, here's another area where being an old fart is an advantage, is that when I look at what abiogenesis research was thinking about when I was in high school in the late 1960s, it was like diddly. And if I knew in 1969 what we know in 2019, holy moly, how much advancement has been made. It's not to the goalposts yet, but there's a heck of a lot more. The discovery that the core of the ribosome is an RNA molecule, not a protein, is just a screamer of a clue. That this is something that is relating to what was going on in prebiotic chemistry, that is a long pathway of things that eventually lead to the winner that becomes the thing that we know as Luca. And the idea that whenever, and if you're not familiar with Luca, last universal common ancestor, that's the basis, that's the thing for all extant life. But we can't assume there was not in the initial stages of living systems other non-Luca things that were competitors, in the same way that the Cambrian explosion had a whole slew of phyla that never went anywhere. That there may have been other biologies going on that got weeded out because the one that eventually led to Luca worked better. And that's the one we're stuck with now.
Yeah.
Trying to work all this out post hoc is immensely difficult. And it's only a small number of people that do it. you could probably gather all the origin of life researchers into a relatively small meeting room. You wouldn't need a giant convention hall for it. They're that few.
And some of the, unfortunately, due to things like horizontal gene transfer, there really aren't a whole lot of structures that Luca would have possessed that are pretty definitively known. We know it would have had like ATP synthase, and it was like a sodium antiporter and a few other things, like a few other very minimal, molecular mechanisms for making energy and doing other little jobs here and there.
Yeah,
but not a whole lot of stuff. But also,
Immutable Destiny mentioned that there are alternative ideas for DNA, which include TNA and PNA. And Travis said they'll look that up. Yeah, go ahead and research that. There's been a slew of papers on both of those. Quite a lot of them in PNAS over the years. So that's all open access. You'll be able to download the full text on those. And it's I can't remember what the hell the TNA refers to. Refers to it's a something or other, polyphenol something or other nucleic acid. I can't remember what it is. It's a different structure. It obviously is not used in extant life, but the idea, I can't remember who was the one that did an awful lot of work on that. I think the guy just died.
Acid.
Yeah. Anyway, they're alternate modalities of things, and the idea that there might have been replicators that made use of some of these. Some of them have catalytic elements and biological features that the other ones don't. In the same way that RNA has a catalytic element that DNA doesn't. And so all of these things are relevant variables in trying to work out at arm's length, billions of years after the fact, what prebiotic chemistry was doing when only fragments of it have ended up incorporated into the system we're familiar with in Luca. And so having that sense of the time frame involved, that we're looking at something that is, certainly by 4 billion years, I would think that Luca is probably dangling around. But there's still hundreds of millions of years of window for prebiotic systems to be doing their thing before we get to that stage.
This is interesting, RJ. There's a whole PNA world hypothesis. Mm-hmm. Because PNA, there has been hypothesized that the earliest life may have used PNA due to its extreme robustness, simpler formation, and possible spontaneous polymerization at 100 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, wow. and there's I have a I include things in my origin of life category. I have my spreadsheet that lists off these various topic areas, and origin of life includes the obvious stuff like this. But other areas that I include as functionally origin of life issues is, where did the DNA repair systems come from? And there's a whole bunch of them. Little things that do their trick of monitoring and correcting for mutations. And obviously they aren't perfect, because otherwise there'd be no successful mutations. But the thing is, of glitches in the system, how did the glitch repair systems develop? That to me is one of the most fascinating undercovered issues. Creationists don't really pay a heck of a lot of attention to it. The only ones that are even trying to research the area are the biologists. And as yet, there's still, every year, another DNA repair mechanism pops up, where there's a whole bunch of layer on layer on layer of these little kludgy things that sometimes can malfunction, and they cannot catch something, or they're repairing in a certain little context, and then the little cleanup crew. That's another issue that's highly relevant to origin of life issues. The things that most of this enters into the encode issue is that most DNA is just processed independent. It's automatic. Every single cell contains the entire DNA genome, and you deal with a big chunk of it, and it basically transcribes everything. And then what doesn't get used, the cleanup crew takes away and recycles. And all this happens at blinding speed. Well, that cycling crew, the cleanup crew, is another one of those little things that I put in the origin of life category, because it's in that early stages of how the cellular systems that we're familiar with in the Luca period have originated. And I can tell you, nobody in the anti-evolution business is doing any of this work.
Well, sure.
It's all being done by evolutionists.
What's his name? Nick Lane talks about the origin of introns in The Vital Question, because as a bacteria, prokaryotes don't have introns, but eukaryotes do, and he suggests that might be,
and why
that might have been caused in part by the proto-mitochondria's interactions with the nucleoid of
there's a whole subcategory of intron early versus intron late debate. And then maybe it's both, that introns could have developed very early and are signs of early developmental thing, and then others have actually developed over time. And so we've coined, you actually coined the word, and we're going to be popularizing it, monocausism, which is the disparagement of any attempt to think that complex phenomenon have a single cause for it. No, everything is synergistic and interactive in biology.
I've actually worked that into my everyday vocabulary, and people know what I'm saying, so I like it.
Yeah, we're exemplifying the tradition of Stephen Jay Gould, who, if there isn't a word for something, we coin it. And so I have my Tortugan, and Jackson has his monocausism, and make use of it. Because they're terms that are applying to something that doesn't have a word attached, so you should go ahead and do that. Well, here we are. We dreadle on even longer than that. Are there any questions over in the live chat in there before we shut down and I go and get my soup for the day? Nim said, I think God made the introns and all the rest. Yes. Well, my favorite example that I like to dump on creationists, if they start talking about genetic information and the like, is ALUs. That we've got like 1.4 million of them in the human genome. They're replicating a couple hundred every generation. They're a retrotransposon that basically has a copy me signal, so they're just running rampant. And once in a while, they kick in and become functional, which is usually not a good thing because they cause some diseases, but they ended up being functional and useful in brain biology. A tornado junkyard, wreck Eric Hovind too. Oh, I'd love to. Eric doesn't really do debates. He is an apologist that likes being on his own little safety turf. And he's operated, he's still a bloody parasite. In fact, I'm alluding to a section in Rocks Were There where I've spotted, and other people have done it as well. I alluded to this video. Eric just repeats wholesale stuff that Daddy said.
Oh, sure.
And so he's not terribly original. And now, of course, he copies material. He has that head shaking mode. Well, he'll be listening to the creationist pundit from Answers in Genesis and going, that sounds good. You know, that's kind of the level of his analysis. He's not a deep thinker, but but in one case, it was so funny because he was glomming on. It was relating to a vestigial organ issue, and he was copying wholesale the argument that his dad had put up on his website, but he has his name on it, except he copied it completely. And along the way, it refers to my book, which is a book by Kent Hovind, not Eric Hovind. So he doesn't even bother vetting and correcting. The only thing he disabled was the link to the book, because apparently he didn't want Kent to make any money off of it, but he forgot to remove it from the text.
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's the whole reason that there's really nothing to talk about with Eric is that he's just Hovind the junior. He doesn't do anything. He's so secure. I mean, he's completely secondary. He's so secured from everything that there's nothing to even talk about with him.
And everybody needs to remember that to distinguish between fact claimants, it's a point that we make a big deal out of in The Rocks Were There, and I was doing that at a certain level in Evolution Slam Dunk, is to distinguish between people, no matter how prominent they may appear to be, no matter how many followers they may be. Ken Ham is way better known than Nathaniel Jensen in the creationism community. If you bump into an average creationist, they will not necessarily know anything about Nathaniel Jensen, but they're going to know Ken Ham. Ken Ham is a secondary redactor. Nathaniel Jensen is a fact claimant. They're the people who actually have some credentials. They're actually making technical arguments that they themselves originated, not ones that are simply being copied downstream by the secondary redactors. So it's one of the points about methodology approach of TIP is to distinguish between the layers of things. Kent Hovind is a secondary redactor. Eric Hovind is a secondary redactor. Matt Powell is a secondary redactor. Standing for Truth is a secondary redactor. And so if you know their level on the field, then you can start looking, well, where are they getting their fact claimant information from? And in the case of Standing for Truth and some of these others, at least they're copying off of fact claimants, But in too much of the case, Eric Hovind isn't even getting to the copying off of the fact claimant level. He's copying off of other secondary redactors, and that's not a good thing to do.
That
Immutable
reminds me,
Destiny
RJ, have
asks,
you seen?
Immutable is asking if because Kent used the cosmological fine-tuning argument. I haven't heard him use it a lot, if at all. For one thing, it's because it's heavily dependent on standard physics. And to use it means you're accepting standard physics chronology, which means billions of years old universe. So generally speaking, young Earth creationists are wary of that anthropic fine-tuning argument. You find it just easily used in intelligent design apologetics. They just jump on that with a bandwagon because they don't have to argue. They're not trying to book Noah's Ark. They don't have to worry about the decay rate of elements and stuff. They can just go with it. And so fine-tuning, although it will be used by secondary redactors, the smorgasborders will read the fine-tuning argument at an intelligent design website and copy that, and in the very next breath, talk about vestigial organs that they've glommed onto from a Kent Hovind video. So you can easily see them flipping along on that. And that smorgasborders won't fall into that category. But by and large, the anthropic fine-tuning argument is more common in the old Earth creationist and intelligent design frame. There, am I? Sorry for me being informative again, but there it is. That's what I do. I study the source base. I study who are the players, what they do. Jump in there, Jackson.
I wanted to ask RJ if you'd seen the most recent Paulogia video.
Oh, which one is it on? I try to catch all of his videos because he's a corker, and
he compares. So he does he and Logic team
Oh yes, the Logic twin. Yes, that was hilarious. Yes, in fact, I'm citing it in the book because when it comes up to Eric, superficially, this was just serendipitous. I was literally researching Eric copying Kent's stuff for his website. At the time, the Logic video came up on my feed. And so I told them on the video, I said, hey, this is perfect. I'm going to be citing this because what Logic did was take Kent Hovind video and Eric Hovind video and sync them up line by line, pause by pause, that it was so clear that Eric was imitating his dad in terms of text. It was just hilarious. So yeah, I'm citing that in Rocks.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you saw that because this conversation made me think of just how hilarious that was. They say every single state, every joke, it's just all the same.
Absolutely identical. So the idea, so Eric is at a lower level than his daddy Kent, who is at least secondarily citing some people who are secondarily citing fact claim and stuff. But Kent relies heavily upon Walt Brown. Let me type that in the live feed here. Walt Brown, he's got his book. It's up. I think it came out like 2001, although he makes modifications to it. He's still around. I think creationscience.com, something like that. But his grand epic is all available open access. You can glom onto it. If you look at that stuff, easily half of what Kent Hovind spews out on his channel comes from Walt Brown. When he's the stuff on dating woolly mammoths, the material on this recession of the moon most probably came from Walt Brown. That's his oracle, and he openly admits it. He'll hold up the book every once in a while and say, oh, this is an excellent resource to draw on. So if you become familiar with Walt Brown, you are already ahead of Kent Hovind. If you are aware of the various mistakes that Walt Brown makes, you are now ahead of Kent Hovind. So there's the dynamics of it. Source methods is the universal toolkit, and it's the game that creationists cannot play. So now that we're at a half hour over the show, I think we pretty well covered everybody's issues on here. And come back next week. And later on in July, I will be gone for the late end of July and into early August because of some family reunions that we're getting together with. And I got to drive all the way down there to get to it. So there will be no evolution hours, but that will be, I think, the 17th probably will be the last that Wednesday. And then I'll be off for a couple of weeks and then be back on again. But we'll cross those bridges when we come to it. Help out in every way you can. If you can become a Patreon, $1, $5 a month is just colossally important. If you can do better than that, then oh, thank you so much. I'm keeping up with the work here. Jackson and I are continuing to work on the book, and we hope to get that out this year. I'm continuing to make progress with the next Phileas Fogg novel that I'm slipping in on the side as well. If you see steam coming out of my ear at some point, it's because I've finally gotten frazzly. Get the books, tell everybody about the project, even if you can't afford to get any of the stuff. Tell people about it. Let people up higher up on the food chain know about it. Ding Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and Tyson and Freeman Dyson, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and anybody else in the field that needs to know about the stuff, let them know about it, because I can't bang my own drum all the time because I'm just a lowly schlub out in the middle of nowhere in Spokane doing that. I mean, I try, but it sounds self-serving because it is. So help out in that. So I think that about covers everything. Bye, Morton. Nim said there will be RJ withdrawals. I hope you, if you bathe in turpentine, it will get it to borrow a line from the chief detective. So thank you for all. See you next week. Keep up the good fight. Learn source methods. Don't let any creationists give bullshit. And thanks, Jackson, for being here today. And we are now saying goodbye.